Hello everybody, this is part 2 of the plumbing code, and we're going to go ahead and get started on this so that you will be able to have a kind of an understanding of what's going on in here. So let's start with part 2. Okay, remember we talked about designer's responsibility. Typically we're designing the space. We're specifying the fixtures. You will find, of course, your construction manager is making sure that what has been specified, of course, is what is being installed and that there's no shortcuts. We're going to be talking about as designers the type of fixtures, aware of plumbing chases, access. Smaller jobs, may not require an engineer, but you have to work with a licensed plumber. And therefore, sometimes those drawings that you saw in the last video may require you to have some shop drawings. And you're going to find out if you're doing restaurant design or other items. Sometimes you'll have places like Cisco, Kirby, other companies that will do those shop drawings for you. There's also something referenced to their performance code, and that's in the ICC. I've got to look at sustainability features, and then of course accessibility requirements of selecting the fixtures that meet the ANSI and the ICC, the TOS accessibility standards. Those are minimum clearances, minimum standards to make sure your location requirements, ease of control, use, and others accessibility standards are followed. So designers, of course, can determine the quantity, the type of plumbing fixtures, plus the number of accessible features that's required. All these factors will affect your design and determine the number of restrooms you have to have, of course, and the size in the restroom. Remember, back to the very first video, we have to, of course, look and see how far that plumbing or that restroom has to be from a particular tenant finish out or location. So you've got to make sure that all of that's taken in consideration. In addition, you've got to look at the type of drinking fountain that may affect the width or shape of a corridor. It can't extend out, because remember, nothing can extend out into a corridor or a hallway more than 7 inches. So sometimes they have to be recessed into those particular halls. So the number of fixtures must be calculated when there is new construction, or when there is a building addition, or when we change our occupancy classification. Just because we have a building that's there doesn't mean that it has to remain. If you change from one occupancy classification to the other, that means you may have to have major changes within the building to meet what that classification is requiring. Going back and looking at the text in Table 403 in your textbook, or in Chapter 29, Table 2902.1, of course, goes back and shows you that particular plumbing table to determine how many fixtures that we have to have. Typically, every floor in a building will require at least one toilet or restroom. Everyone should have access to a restroom. Some tenant spaces, remember, may require their own toilet facility. And if any fixture's total results in a fraction, you always round up to the nearest whole number. This is kind of a little summary of what we've already discussed. And our general notes, remember, the number of required fixtures determined by the occupancy classification and then the load. Remember, the path of travel to a facility cannot be longer than 500 feet. Go back and look at 2902.3.3. Read the section also in your IBC Code Book 1109, which I'm not going to go over. I'm expecting you to read it. You will learn that a percentage of fixtures will need to be accessible. That's 5% of the total number of fixtures. So if you have 10 in your women's and you have 8 or whatever in your men's, 5% of those have to be accessible. In the men's, that could be water closet and a urinal, so you have to look at that. A private toilet facility cannot be deducted or subtracted from the required number that you have to have. A private toilet facility must be adaptable. If you have unisex toilet facilities, they're usually required by code when 6 or more water closets are provided. Remember, if you're going down to a smaller number, you can have several of just unisex, and they can be your required number. Toilet facilities must be provided for the employees and the customers. They can be shared, but you cannot have one in the back if it's not accessible to your client. Adjustments to the number of fixtures may be made in some cases depending on the occupancy classification, but you have to have code official approval. So let's say we're doing a women's gymnasium only. Well, you've got to get, of course, approval just so that we have at least some accessibility. If a male mechanic person comes in to work on equipment, that he has a restroom, but if it's all for females, then of course that's called, some jurisdictions have party regulations, so you need to be aware of those. So, determination of number of plumbing fixtures, read from the text, male-female ratios, the grouping of fixtures, where you have family-assisted use facilities, private facilities, public and employee facilities, access to the facility, unusual use group, that means if it's all for women or all for men, or unusual male-female ratio. Sometimes you may end up having where there's more males than females. It could be a baseball park and more of the males are there than the females, so you have to get approval. But a lot of times you will find that most jurisdictions want to even it out. Also, certain jurisdictions require use of automatic faucets. So that means that where you put your foot or your hand goes under and the water automatically starts. All fixtures have to be durable and finished with a smooth, impervious material. It has to meet certain water consumption standards because we have to look at the water conservation. Some jurisdictions, of course, have stricter, of course, water conservation, so you have to look. If you're doing something in California, make sure that you look and know what the consumption of water per flush or hand starting fixtures in the sink. In commercial, you have to have an elongated bowl, so you need to make sure you specify that. A hinge seat with an open front. You have to specify the maximum flow and water consumption allowed per flush for that jurisdiction. You have to have clearance for installation. So for like IBC, 15 inches side from center of bowl, 21 inches clear in front of the bowl. Enclosed cannot be less than 30 inches wide, 56 to 60 inch depth wall or floor mounted, and a privacy lock. So, but in TAS, Texas Accessibility Specialist, it's a little different. So you're going to have to go back and look at those requirements. Accessibility height, 17 to 19 inches, and you see that, of course, in your textbook. Accessibility percentages, typically all fixtures used in a unisex or single toilet facility must be accessible. So review section 1109 in your ICC code book. Calculating. So let's go back to make sure you understand. If we're working on a school, go back and open your table up, and we have 620 occupants. Refer to the educational. It requires one water closet for every 50 people. So we're going to take 620 divided by 50, and so we're taking the 620 and dividing it by 2 if you want to be able to find out how many fixtures that we have. So we're going to end up, of course, needing 7 fixtures, because when it's divided by 2 and we subtract the 50 and then, of course, go back through, it's 6.5, which equals, we always have to round up to 7. Then we have to look at our travel distance that's required for educational. So every floor to have at least one water closet, clearance for installation, specify elongated bowl, remember the hinge seat, require for typical dimensions, and look at your tasks. Urinals. It's not required in every occupancy type or classification, typically found in male restrooms of schools, restaurants, clubs, lounges, transportation terminals, auditoriums, theaters, and church. can substitute for one or more of the required water closets, but up to a certain quantity that's there. Not more than 67% in assembly or education can be urinals. There are some things called waterless urinals and regular urinals. So you have to be able to understand or decide if you wanted to use a waterless urinals. A lot of jurisdictions are specifying that. I'm just not sure if I really like the use of waterless urinals. You need to, of course, look at the dimensions where they're placed, because the height of where those are, and depending on who is your clientele that's using it, sometimes lowering, of course, that height, of vertical height, may make a difference if you have more children or people that are more accessible needs. So you're going to have to look to make sure on that. But you always have to have a parking spot of 30 inches by 48 inches in front, so someone in the wheelchair will have access to be able to use that urinal. IBC requires a privacy panel if 2 or more urinals are used, so you need to look at that. Lavatories. Anywhere a water closet uses a lavatory must be installed. However, the same ratio is not seen, so that means that we don't have to have the same number of water closets and the same number of lavatories. You need to go through and do the same calculations depending on the number that you see in the table. Codes typically limit the amount of hot water delivered to prevent scalding. Normally there is a sensor or metered to be able to make sure that we don't get water just so hot somebody burns themselves. When accessible, the faucet must be within accessible reach ranges and controls easy to operate. And you normally have to have a lever handled or push type or automatic to be able to have the sink or lavatory. Refer to figure 7.3 in your textbook. 5% of the lavatories have to be accessible, and the drain pipes below must be covered to prevent contact. Remember, it's usually open or they're covered underneath because you've got to get the wheelchair underneath the sink area. Sinks, remember, usually considered miscellaneous fixtures. You're going to see something like this. Now, that may be a service sink, a utility kitchen, or laundry basin, depends on your occupancy classification. I must require a utility sink for the janitor or mop sink. Now, generally, these are not considered to be accessible, but you need to be able to look and find out. Sometimes if you have a kitchen sink, you're going to have to review. But I would look and be familiar with the TAS book. You all have the smaller version to make sure that it meets the right recommendations. Drinking fountains required in most occupancy except certain residential. If you have more than one floor, you need one on each floor. Restaurants that serve water are typically exempt from supplying a drinking fountain, but some local jurisdictions have made allowances for space that provide bottled water dispensers or filtered tap water exemptions. The IBC dispensers cannot substitute more than 50%. You also have to look at the restrictions on location of drinking fountains. Cannot be installed in public toilet rooms or vestibules leading to restrooms. Most common locations in the corridor leading to restroom. Remember your projections. You can't project into that hallway or corridor. IBC requires a minimum of 2 drinking fountains on each floor, one that is wheelchair accessible and one that is standing height for those who have difficulty bending. So the standard height of a wheelchair can be no more than 36 inches AFF above finished floor and have a front or side spout easily to approach. Standing non-ADA spout 38 to 43 inches. So review, of course, in your textbook and look in your TAS book. Bathtubs. Codes do not regulate, of course, the size. They do not have requirements for certain accessory components, but faucets must regulate mixed hot and cold water to prevent scalding. Enclosed, if glass used, must be safety glass, and mechanical equipment like spa type must have access to a pump. If a tub is accessible, of course, there's all different types of requirements. In a hotel room, it's going to give you the percentage of how many have to have accessible showers or tubs, and then that gets into the seat and the grab bars that have to be added to it. Showers typically required in residential and institutional occupancies. Some assemblies, gymnasiums, health clubs require showers. Glass enclosures have to be safety glass, 22-inch access door width, and that's really 32-inch access door width. Sorry for the mix-up there. Flow rates for water consumption. Size, of course, not less than 900 square inches, at least 30 inches in one direction, and the wall height. You need to make sure you have transfer roll-in, so you've got to have roll-in area for somebody in a wheelchair to roll in that. The threshold, of course, cannot be higher than a ½ inch. So look in the textbook, but you need to reference, of course, the TOS book. Dishwashers and clothes washers are required only in certain residential occupancies. Multiple residential units usually require one clothes washer required for every 20 units. When there's multiple washers or dryers, they are provided. Typically, one of each must be accessible if the top loader should not be higher than 36 inches in front of the loading, the bottom, of course, between 15 and 36 inches AFF, with operable parts, accessible reach range. So this next is just kind of showing you, of course, a little bit of a layout. One of the things that you have to look, codes require privacy at the entrance. So you see right here, there's no door sight, but you can't see into the restroom because this wall, second wall, of course, hinders your view into the actual area that's there. So there's sink areas and others. So you've got to kind of make sure. There's diagrams on the left-hand side that tells you if you have two different doorways, how much room do you need in between the door and the door, or the wall and the wall to get through. So make sure you follow those restrictions. If you have a single toilet facility, you've got to, of course, 60-inch minimum clear space, clear diameter within that, so somebody in a wheelchair can come in, turn around, and be able to get out. There's lots of dimensions that you have to follow, so review those and make sure that you're meeting those needs. These, of course, would be sometimes referred to as family toilet facilities. If you have multiple toilet facilities, two types of accessible stalls require accessible stall and an ambulatory accessible stall. And grab bars are going to be a little bit different, so review drawing figure 7.7 in your book. Bathing facilities, remember, residential, apartments, hotel, guest rooms, assisted living. You're going to have to read section 10, 12 in your IBC to kind of make sure you understand that, and also look at your TOS book. Grab bars, we could spend a whole day on trying to look at the normal height of grab bars and the dimensions. So look through there, knowing that your typical diameter is 1 1/4 to 2 inches and 1.5 inch distance from the wall and the bar. Accessories that we have to kind of look at also within a public restroom is hand dryers or paper towel dispenser. They cannot project more than 4 inches. A lot of the devices are automatic. They have levers or push buttons. You have to look at the toilet paper holders, and you have to look at the height that those are installed. Signage. All toilet and bathing facilities require at least one sign. Type of sign depends on the type of facility and the size of the facility. Non-accessible facilities must have a sign indicating where the location of the accessible one is. When you have multiple toilet or multiple bathing facility, must indicate the location of the nearest family. Each accessible facility have a sign that includes international symbol, which you see in your textbook with the wheelchair. And the 2012 IBC requires directional signage to be posted at the entrance of a building or space which indicates the route to a public toilet facility. Signs have to be both visual and tactile, allowing lettering symbols in a particular size and portion. You can see, of course, here is the universal symbol for accessibility. The lettering and symbols have particular sizes and portions. Most time you work with a signage company that can come back and give you a whole packet of the recommendations because they keep up with it. But you need to be able to have research to make sure that if you hire somebody, they are hanging it at the correct height that it has to be, and where you have to measure from the middle of the sign to the bottom of the sign. All of that is in your TOS book. Remember, water conservation is something that's really we're looking at, because water is probably one of the number one resources that we are trying to work from. Besides energy, we have to look at those. The International Energy Conservation Code, the ASHRAE 90.1, and there's lots of standards for buildings. You're going to see now there's an International Green Construction Code, and then there's the Environmental Protection Agency, EPA's Water Sense program that's out there. All of these are new agencies that we have to be aware of to make sure we're following their recommendations. So I hope this kind of gives you a quick overview, and you will read the chapter in depth.